Hello. For those of you who signed up for the webinar, Struggling with Suicide Attempts, How to Help, and were on the live webinar, you will know that I had significant technical issues. And about halfway through the presentation, my PowerPoint stopped and you couldn't see the slides or anything like that. So I am re-recording the webinar. It's not live. Unfortunately, Go Van Martin from Prevent Suicide PA isn't able to join us. There won't be an audience to ask questions, so it'll just be me giving the presentation as I would have yesterday had everything gone smoothly. So, and in case if you haven't figured out, I'm Heidi Bryan. So, when I was asked to do this webinar, I decided I wanted to take more of a broader picture of it, how different things kind of come together to help you understand and know how to help someone who's suicidal, and not do something like QPR, because there's QPR. Why reinvent the wheel? It dawned on me recently that I'm 62 years old and that I've been struggling with suicidal thoughts and ideation since I was, 10. I've been diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, dissociative identity disorder, and addiction. And yet I've made it to 62. So how did I make it there? How did I get here alive? And so I also decided to include things that really helped me, that really had a big impact on me and my growth and in my journey, and things that I use today, because I still struggle with chronic suicidal thoughts. So the first thing I want to talk about is the impact of a suicide attempt. And there are several common reactions we have when someone we love or know has attempted suicide. One of the first is usually fear, anger. There was a young woman who said she was suicidal or that she was going to kill herself, and I don't remember the circumstances anymore. I just know that they couldn't find her for a while. And when they finally did, her father had told someone that he was so angry he could have killed her himself. There's a sense of shame because of the stigma around suicide and mental health issues, a sense of betrayal, especially among spouses, disappointment that it could get to this, that it happened, that you didn't come to us first, or, just that you would feel this way. That you would, things got so bad for you that you felt you had to do this. Fear often is makes you react strongly, sometimes with anger, and other times it makes you become more restrictive, or just simply, it can even be paralyzing. One mother said she used to stand outside her son's bedroom door and listen to make sure she could hear him breathe that night after he attempted. A sense of frustration, upset, because you may not understand it, you just don't get it, how anyone could feel this way or get there. Or you may not feel anything at all, you may just be numb. Also, because it is a traumatic event, and that's one thing that I think sometimes we gloss over, that suicide and suicide attempts are traumatic events and need to be treated as such. You can also feel this sense of powerlessness and helplessness and lack of control. If it's a repeat attempt, if it's happened before, you have everything that you had in the previous slide, all those emotions, but you kind of kick it up a notch. And there's just this level of frustration, like, you may be asking yourself, what am I doing wrong? What am I not getting? Why is this happening again? Will this ever end? This sense of disappointment and disbelief and fear. Now, there was a young woman who was hospitalized after her second attempt, and said when she came home, her mother removed the door from her bedroom, screened all her calls, took her to her classes, picked her up from her classes, took her to appointments, picked her up from appointments, and gave her absolutely no freedom at all. And while that is very understandable, I mean, and we said that to her, you know, you get why she's doing this. It's also counterproductive because it makes you feel like you're trapped. And that, I know for me, feeling trapped is one of my triggers. Or maybe if they are in the hospital or having a 72-hour hold, you may feel relieved. Relieved that they're safe for now, or relieved that you have a reprieve. You don't have to think about it for a while. Suicides and suicide attempts don't happen in a vacuum. They have this tremendous ripple effect. It's the family, it's cousins, it's immediate family, it's cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, then it's co-workers, it's friends, it goes on and on. But the good news is that suicide prevention and hope also have a ripple effect. I want to talk a little bit more on the impact this has on the family and friends and co-workers. Parents want to fix things. They want to protect their children from bad things. So they often feel like they failed. They may feel, confused, should have seen it coming. How could they not know this was happening to their child? Just confusion, how could they want to do this? How did it get there? They're devastated that it got to this point. And again, maybe that they didn't know, but we know that, parents are oftentimes, unfortunately, the last to know. It can also impact young children. And while they may not have seen anything, and of course it depends on the child and the circumstances, they can still sense if something's wrong at home. Unfortunately, they don't have very effective ways of communicating it, so their behavior may change. They may become clingy, lose some toileting skills or speech, have difficulty sleeping, either become fearful, don't want to go to bed at night, have nightmares, or don't want to sleep alone. As they get older, they can develop feelings of guilt and shame. They may feel they're to blame. Maybe if they had done their homework, this wouldn't have happened, and depending on their age, they may have, again, they may not be able to convey what they're feeling very well either. So they may have sleep disturbances, difficulty at school, somatic complaints such as headaches, stomach aches, that kind of thing. They may feel a sense of betrayal too. So they need to know they're not at fault. And then when they're teenagers, these feelings of fear and vulnerability and concern over being labeled abnormal or different from their peers may cause them to develop more aggressive behavior or withdraw from their friends because they don't want to be seen as, a freak or something. And they may also withdraw from everyone because they just want to be alone. It can also lead to self-destructive or accident-prone behaviors. Spouses feel a tremendous sense of betrayal. Trust will have to be restored and rebuilt. They feel hurt and angry and confused. How can you do this? Why didn't you think of us? Didn't you know what this would do to us? You'd rather be dead than be with me. And also, they may feel alone and depressed and isolated as well. They may feel they can't talk to anyone about it. Siblings often feel neglected, that all the attention is going to the attempt survivor. And while that's understandable, they also are hurting and need help. Maybe the sibling indicated something to them and they didn't share it. So they are dealing with that. And they need to know that, that's okay, but in the future you have to let us know. they may feel awkward and not know how to talk to the sibling. They may feel like maybe if I say something, I'll get them angry, and then they might attempt again, or guilty, resentful that all the attention's going to the other sibling, or sometimes they may feel like the attempt survivor is manipulating the parents, taking advantage of the situation. I feel like crap too, but no one cares about that kind of thing. Again, this also includes cousins and friends, but the attempt survivor themselves it has an impact on them as well. They can be very, very upset and angry or disappointed that they lived. My mother was hospitalized, and she would always talk about, there was a young woman next to her who woke up from a suicide attempt. And my mom would always talk about how horrible it was to witness that, to witness the young woman's realization that she was still alive, and how much she didn't want to be. You can feel like a failure, a defective, guilty, ashamed. You might withdraw, not want to, because of the guilt or shame, you might not want to, be seen by anyone, or, you might want to be on your own because you're constantly being monitored or questioned. And a lot of times too, you feel numb after this. But each person will react differently and have their own response to an attempted suicide. But guilt is a universal reaction that everyone will feel at some level. But what I want to talk about next is how much of it is guilt and how much of it is shame. I believe shame is a topic that we don't really talk enough about. I know for myself, I struggle with shame. My therapist once said, I don't remember what we were talking about anymore, but as kind of an aside, he's like, "Oh, I can't even say that because you're too shame-based." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "No, you won't be able to handle it. I can't say it." And it was something good. It wasn't something bad. It was something good. And I realized that this is gonna, I know he's mentioned it before. I know it's a thing, but I think it's finally a thing that I have to start working on. And I started to learn more about shame, and I realized how shame-based I am, and I've worked with this almost pretty much daily. But what's the difference between guilt and shame? Shame is about the self, whereas guilt is about an action or a triggering behavior or attribute. Shame is I am bad, whereas guilt is I did something bad. And shame's associated with more painful feelings and lashing out and escaping, whereas guilt is less painful. It's remorse, regret, wanting to make things better, apologizing, making amends, and it's often motivating. It's a motivating reaction, emotion. And being prone to guilt leads to higher functioning a lot of times. But shame is not motivating. People used to think they could shame you into good behavior, but there's been research and it doesn't suggest the theory. So in reality, there is no such thing as healthy shame. I also thought I'd want to talk about the difference between embarrassment, humiliation, guilt, and shame, because I think a lot of times we get all these confused. Embarrassment is fleeting and eventually becomes funny. We know the moment is something that other people have experienced, and that makes it bearable. So, it's the least intense of the emotion. I fell in the middle of a busy street, and I had an armful of, I think it was books, and they went, they just scattered everywhere, and I had to quick pick them up. And of course there's traffic, and I'm feeling like, oh my God, I just want to disappear. And this man came up and started helping me, and he's like, are you okay? did you hurt anything? And I said, only my pride, you know. That was embarrassment. Humiliation is we feel we don't deserve it. So it evokes anger. So we talk about it. Something happened to us and how could that happen? How could they do that to me? Kind of thing. And we talk about it. Guilt, as I said, motivates us. We feel or recognize we did something wrong, and it's something that we can correct in the future. We can make amends and apologize. And we talk about it. Whereas shame, we feel like we deserve it. We believe that we're flawed, we're unlovable, we're inadequate, and we stay silent. And it leads to self-destructive behaviors. It's also associated with not being enough. You're not smart enough, you're not good enough, you know. Who do you think you are that you can be giving this presentation? You're not good enough for that. You're not qualified. Comparison, how do I compare to others, and what are the areas I compare? And I bet you 9 times out of 10, you come up short. Also, unwanted identities. You don't want to be perceived as weak or an addict or lazy, stupid, whatever it is. And it doesn't matter if you are or not, it's how you perceive yourself. And these things will evoke shame. And that dictates how we behave and think and feel every day. Experiences of shame tend to be very intense and overpowering because they evoke a sense of being bad, worthless, unlovable, and even contemptible. It's frequently associated with a sense of powerlessness, sensations of shrinking, feeling small, wanting to disappear, being exposed. It's, in fact, our bodies react to shame before our conscious minds do. That fight, flight, or freeze. What is that? I can't think of the word. Well, anyway, that's activated before our, conscious minds recognize it. It doesn't it likes to stay hidden. It likes secrecy, silence, and judgment. So it's avoided in everyday language. And so since is linked to this desire to hide and conceal, and feelings of shame stay hidden. We don't really talk about it that much. It's influenced by culture. We learn the importance of fitting in, being liked, and pleasing others. Media is another powerful communicator, teaching us who we should be, how we should be, what we should be. And shame really unravels our connection to others. There's this disconnection from the self. That's a loss of authenticity. And it's not present at birth. It's children by 5th grade are identified as shame-prone or guilt-prone. Brene Brown noted that shame-proneness is strongly related to depression, addiction, eating disorders, self-harm, bullying, aggression, violence, and suicide. She described it as a intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. She says shame corrodes the part of us that thinks we can change. But the good news is that there's an antidote to shame. And the antidote to shame is getting it out in the open. So empathy is essential in combating shame and starting to talk about it and having empathy for the person who's dealing with shame, but also the person with the shame having empathy for themselves. You take perspective of things and you don't judge. You recognize the emotions and you communicate our understanding of that person's feelings. Brene Brown also adds mindfulness to empathy and says that it's the ability to perceive a situation from another person's perspective, to see, heal, and feel the unique world of the other. So let's talk a little more about empathy and why it's so important. People are more likely to want to change and open up if they feel understood. A lack of empathy leads itself to silence and secrets, and so the person will shut down and not want to share anything. And it helps the person to feel heard and validated. A recent radio program surveyed its listeners on how they knew they were loved, and they responded that they knew they were loved when they felt heard. So how can you have empathy for the suicidal person? Well, one thing to know is that if someone is feeling like they no longer want to live, they are in intense psychological pain. They're feeling like they don't belong, that they're a burden, that there is no hope, that things won't get better, that people would be better off without them. And the only viable solution to that intense psychological pain is to end their lives. Their life and their pain have become the one and the same. So they don't necessarily want to die. They want to end their pain. And they can't see that their thinking's distorted, that there are solutions or changes that can be made to lessen their pain and the intensity of the situation. So they really need help from someone else with that, to be able to see, to widen their vision. And so if you can understand, and see how they reach that point without judgment, you will be able to listen to them and help them. You don't want to interfere, stop, or correct the suicidal wishes or ideation. And I'm not talking about that you're going to let them go ahead and attempt or anything like that. What I'm talking about is when you're listening to them, when they're explaining how they're feeling, or you're understanding it, that you don't try and correct it. Let them share their feelings, because for a lot of us, myself included, it's a coping mechanism. I used it for years as, well, if things get too bad, I can always kill myself. And it was this out for me. And I knew that in the back of my mind, and it helped me. So a lot of times it's this type of coping mechanism. It's, flawed one, but it is. So you don't want to necessarily jump in there and correct them, because that also tells them that, they're flawed and they're wrong and they need to change. I was with my brother and his wife, and he was talking about John Mellencamp's song, I think it was Little Pink Houses. I don't know. No, it wasn't that one. Anyway, the long after the thrill for living is gone, he said that phrase, and without thinking, I blurted out, I can't remember ever having the thrill of living. And he immediately, oh, Heidi, that's horrible. How can you say that? That's awful. You can't feel that way. You shouldn't feel that way. I don't believe, and I'm like, okay, I'll never say that again. It's that kind of thing. It doesn't mean you condone the wishes or the thinking or the ideation or anything like that. It's just a way of building rapport and connection with a person, creating a therapeutic alliance, as Dr. David Jobs calls it, and being a companion in a time of crisis. It develops trust. It helps lessen the sense of isolation and disconnection and pain that the person is in. And it also, empathy can't be faked. So you want to be genuine and express why it is important that the person continue to live. If you can, give specific examples, but you want to be genuine and not just offer false hope. Because we can tell when you're not genuine. I was at a conference for suicide loss, and there were breakout sessions for sibling suicide loss, and I lost my brother to suicide. And a friend of mine and I went, and this woman was conducting the session, and she had notes, which was the first clue. And then it was like she was reading from the notes and talking, and people would ask questions and she would answer, and it was like this rumbling going on. And we said, finally someone just said, do you know anyone who's died by suicide? And she was a therapist, and said, have you had a patient or anyone, have you experienced suicide loss? And she hadn't. And we knew that, we could tell. What prevents you from feeling empathy for the person? Well, you have to pay attention and be willing to listen. And, can you sit comfortably with an uncomfortable subject? Sometimes that's hard. A lot of people are afraid that if they don't respond perfectly, they're not going to show that they have empathy, so they don't say anything at all. A lot of times you're afraid you don't know how. Just, be genuine. There is a cognitive empathy, which is when you can't actually feel the same emotion of the other person, but you know intellectually that you need to communicate empathetically. So sometimes, just listening without judgment is enough to convey cognitive empathy. You can still communicate to the person in an authentic way that you understand what they're experiencing. You may not be able to exactly feel, but you understand what they're feeling. Another barrier is often people will like throw a trump card or stack the deck by telling you their pain or sorrow story. If we spend our time and energy attempting to outdo one another, competing and tell each other's that's nothing kind of stories, we will continue to make each other feel like nothing. So these emotional reactions that I talked about in the beginning, from the family members, from the attempt survivor, and the friends, can now have impact on how you react to the attempt survivor, and can be a roadblock to empathy as well. How am I viewing the person? Do I think them weak, selfish, damaged, crazy, or manipulative? Is it a sin? Do I feel angry or defensive? That's probably your fear. Or am I anxious and trying to avoid the subject entirely? That's also fear. You want to try and take a look at yourself and how you feel. And if you're feeling anything like this, ask yourself why. Why are you feeling this way? Is it because you were afraid you were going to lose them? Is it because you were suicidal yourself? Or have you lost someone to suicide? Or, are you overreacting? Am I trying to control their behavior? That kind of thing. Just look at how you feel about, what is your attitude towards suicide and suicidal ideation or mental health, and really examine that. Another way I thought to understand how a person gets there is to learn more about people, suicidal people. And a lot of times there's characteristics that people who struggle with suicidal ideation have in common. And one of those is a common cognitive distortions. And there are 11 common cognitive distortions, and they are ways that our mind convinces us of something that isn't really true. These inaccurate thoughts are usually used to reinforce negative thinking or emotions. We're telling ourselves things that sound rational and accurate, but really only serve to keep us feeling bad about ourselves. So one of them is all or nothing thinking, viewing situations on one extreme or the other instead of a continuum, black or white, no gray. If your performance falls short of perfection, you see yourself as a failure. Another one is catastrophizing. You predict only negative outcomes for the future. If I fail my exam, my life will be over. You expect disaster to strike no matter what. What if so-and-so happens to me? Discounting or disqualifying the positive. You tell yourself that the good things that happen to you don't really count. You reject positive experiences by insisting they don't count for some reason or another. And in this way, you can maintain a negative belief that is contradicted by everyday experiences. My daughter told her friend that I was the best dad in the world, but I'm sure she was just being nice. You know, she didn't really mean it. Emotional reasoning. So feeling about something that overrules facts to the contrary. If we feel stupid, we must be stupid. It's also associated with magical thinking, the belief that acts will influence unrelated situations. I'm a good person, so bad things shouldn't happen to me. Labeling, giving someone or something a label without finding out more about them. It's an extreme form of overgeneralization. Someone who just drops their children off at daycare each day may, you know, she's abandoning her children to total strangers. She's a bad mother. It's instead of describing your error, you attach a label to yourself. So I made a mistake, I'm a loser. And when it's someone else's behavior that rubs you the wrong way, you attach a negative label to them. He's a louse or an idiot or whatever. These labels are usually, you know, very highly colored and emotionally loaded. Magnification or minimization, emphasizing the negative or downplaying the positive of a situation. You exaggerate the importance of things such as your mistake or someone else's achievement, or you inappropriately shrink things until they appear tiny, such as your own desirable qualities or another person's imperfections. Tunnel vision or mental filter, placing all your attention on the negatives of a situation or seeing only the negatives of a situation. You pick out a single negative detail and dwell on it exclusively so that your vision of all reality becomes darkened, like a drop of ink that discolors an entire beaker of water. And it just restricts your thinking as well. Mind reading, believing that you know what other people are thinking and interpreting the thoughts and beliefs of others without any adequate evidence. Jumping to conclusions is one. She wouldn't go on a date with me, so she must think I'm ugly. I called my friend and left a message, but she hasn't called me back. She must be mad at me. It's the expectation that a situation will turn out badly without adequate evidence. Overgeneralization, making an overall negative conclusion beyond the current situation. You see a single negative event as a never-ending pattern of defeat. Nothing ever works out the way I want it to. You never call when you're going to be late. You always do that. Personalization, thinking the negative behavior of others has something to do with you. My daughter's been pretty quiet today. She hardly said anything since she came home from school. I wonder what I did to upset her. You blame yourself. It's your fault. Shoulds and must statements and oughts as well. Shoulds, must, and oughts. I should get all A's to be a good student. It's, you have a concrete idea of how people should behave. It's as if, you know, you're trying to motivate yourself with the shoulds and shouldn'ts, as if you have to be whipped and punished before you can be expected to do anything. The emotional consequence is guilt and shame. When you direct should statements towards others, you then feel anger, frustration, and resentment that they're not doing what you think they should be doing. Having this inflexible thinking, this cognitive rigidity and restrictions, resistance to change in beliefs and attitudes and values, feeling locked into the current perceptions and unable to imagine alternatives or consider new courses of action, which is especially with suicidal people. They, you know, the only solution they can see is to kill themselves, and that's, I mean, that's the only solution they can see. They are locked into that thinking. Perfectionism. It's, I believe it was Brene Brown has said that shame is the birthplace of perfectionism. It's extremely high levels of self-criticism and also expectations of others. Perfectionism can increases suicide ideation by creating stress, accentuating the adversity of stress, and focusing people's attentions on their flaws and failures rather than their strengths and successes. Some other personality types and trait in suicidal people besides perfectionism is novelty seeking, harm avoidant, sensitivity, decreased tendency to be warm and gregarious, and experience positive emotions, and borderline traits or borderline personality disorder. Impaired autobiographical memory. You can only remember when things did not work out. You can't remember when they did. You only remember the bad times. You can't remember the good times. Poor problem-solving ability or low confidence in problem-solving ability. Looming vulnerability. Suicidal and anxious people are prone to create these elaborate mental scenarios that anticipate rapidly rising risk with, you know, many increasing threats, and they tend to exaggerate the time course of these perceived catastrophic outcomes and have an increase, which creates an increased sense of urgency and avoidance. So I can't fix this problem, I should just die. This also demonstrates the tunnel vision and inflexibility in generating alternatives. Reasons for dying outlive reasons for living. More present oriented, they can't see into the future, or they're just kind of stuck in the present. My husband was on life support, and when I would leave him, I honestly did not know if I would see him the next day or not. And I called my therapist and said, you know, if he dies, I don't know. I don't feel very safe. You know, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so we had an emergency session, and he helped me to see that I couldn't see the future. I was stuck in the present. And, you know, so we imagined what would happen if, you know, it happened. And what would that day be like? What would the next day be like? What would 2 weeks be like? What would a month, 6 months, and so on? And that helped me to realize that, you know, I didn't necessarily have to kill myself if my husband died. That I'd still have a life, you know. It wouldn't be the life I wanted or imagined, but I still would be a life I could live. You view death in more favorable light, and an absence of protective factors such as attraction to life and repulsion to death, surviving and coping beliefs, sense of personal efficacy, moral and religious beliefs, objections to suicide, fear of self-injury, and sense of responsibility to one's family. And I talked about how a person, they want to end their pain, and the only way they can end their pain is to end their life. And so because of that, there's this ambivalence that's associated with suicide. And Dr. Edwin Schneidman, who's known as the father of modern suicidality, always said that the common cognitive state of suicide is ambivalence, that he believed that people were ambivalent up to the very moment of either the act or their death. They wish to die and they wish to live, be rescued simultaneously. I had a Suicide Anonymous support group for a while, and this woman was a regular. We became friends, and she came one week and said that they found a lump in her breast, and she had to go back for more tests, and she said that she was scared. And she said, it's so weird. I'm scared, and I'm scared I might have breast cancer, which means I might die. But yet here I am at Suicide Anonymous because I struggle with, wanting to kill myself. So, and I thought that was just such a great example of ambivalence. Now, how do you capitalize on that? How can you utilize that? I believe it's Dr. Stacy Friedenthal who said, if I gave you a little tool on which you only have to press a button to die, what would you do with it? Would you press it or not? Or would you hesitate? Mm-hmm. And talking with them, finding out why they're suicidal, finding out reasons for why they want to live and why they want to die, you can find out the ambivalence and then capitalize on it. So how can we help someone? Now that we're getting a better understanding of how a person can get there, how do we actually help them? Well, even though this isn't, I didn't want to do a traditional kind of QPR type presentation, I don't think I could forgive myself if I didn't at least mention restrict access to lethal means. Remove guns if possible, if not ammunition, medication if you can, dispense it for them. I know that's a tricky one. When I had an aborted attempt, and I had a handful of pills, and I aborted it because I knew I'd be rescued, and I wasn't gonna have my stomach pumped, and it was never gonna be a suicide attempt for me. And it turns out I had to go to my psychiatrist the next day, and so I had to tell him about it, and I had to get a new prescription. And he did two things. The new prescription was for 2 weeks and not a month, which at first I felt humiliated and ashamed about, that I had to go every 2 weeks to get my prescription. But I got over it. And the other thing he did is he called me the next day at work to see how I was doing. He followed up with me. Don't forget poisons, alcohol, knives, razors is possible. And I realize this is hard, but you do want to try and make the surroundings as safe as possible, and not, give them an easy opportunity. Dr. Ursula Whiteside has created this, she calls it the stop, drop, and roll for suicide prevention. And it's used for immediately before the crisis escalates, but you also need to practice it so that you use it immediately before the crisis escalates. And so she has this, what to do if you have an overwhelming urge to kill yourself. And excuse me, first thing you do is shut it down. And that can be going to sleep, not overdosing or taking something to sleep, but going to sleep. And if you can't sleep, take a cold shower or stick your face in ice water for 30 seconds. Do something to reset, use a reset button. Commit to not making any important decisions, especially if you're deciding to die. Don't panic. Ignore thoughts that you don't care if you die, and stop all drugs and alcohol. And then make eye contact. It's a difficult but very powerful pain reliever. Look someone in their eye and say, can you help me get me out of my head? Or can you help me? Try video chat if you can't find someone. Keep trying until you find someone. It's the direct eye contact is a great pain reliever. You can find out more on Now Matters Now. That's a great website. It has lots of videos and tips for if you're suicidal and what you can do to help yourself and things. I strongly recommend that. Also, a safety plan, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. It's Dr. Greg Brown and Barb Stanley developed this, and it's learn your triggers or their triggers. And there's a lot of evidence on this as well. So recognize your own warning signs. Then how can you help yourself without going to someone else? What are some internal self-soothing techniques you can use? Like meditation or distraction or something. Who can you go to who may offer support as well as a distraction from the crisis? Or maybe it's just going to the library or the coffee shop and observing people. Who can you contact if you need to? If none of that is helping, then who can you contact who might help you resolve the crisis? If you still need more help, what mental health professionals or agencies or where can you go for more help? And then finally, what can you do to reduce the potential for use of lethal means? How can you make the surroundings safe for you? Do you need to have someone take my medication? Do I need to have someone take my medication or something? Can my friend take my gun for a while? And I also, on my template, I always include what is the one thing that is most important to me and is worth living for. Dr. Marsha Linehan always says that, you got to have a life worth living. And if you don't have a life worth living, you're not going to want to live. And I strongly believe that you have to have a life worth living. So what makes my life worth living? Other tools include a hope box. You can create your own hope box. It's Dr. Stacy Friedenthal, speakingofsuicide.com, describes evidence-based practice of creating a homemade hope box and outlines the following possibilities of including items such as letters or printed emails that mean a lot to you, photos of special times you had, of vacations, of people you love, or something inspiring, photos of loved ones, inspirational quotes, maybe Bible verses, if you're religious, articles or columns that you find meaningful, jokes that make you laugh, anything that reminds you of your desire to stay alive. And it's extremely empowering to create a hope box with, together with the attempt survivor. Have the attempt survivor create it, but also do it with them. It's a very empowering task or activity. And I know sometimes it sounds hokey, but it really, I've yet to meet anyone who hasn't enjoyed doing it. There's also a virtual hope box that you can download. You have user, customized hotline mental health agencies, preloaded inspirational quotes, or you can replace them with your own, photos, videos, music that are inspirational and uplifting, distraction techniques such as word puzzles, relaxation techniques such as muscle relaxation or breathing exercises, and coping cards that highlight adaptive thoughts and behaviors when in crisis or managing a problematic core belief. So, they help you to manage a problem area. So you pick a problem area, identify emotions and physical symptoms of it, and then add a coping skill. You can also just do it on a card to cue, but they do need to be rehearsed regularly so that they become second nature and you use them when you need them. Another app is Mood Tools. It has lots of different tools in it. It has and it provides detailed instructions. It has a thought diary, recovery guide, activities, depression test, videos. Here's the thought diary, and a safety plan as well. I think I have Mental Health Association of New York City, but I believe it's now Vibrant Health, created my 3 support network as well. SAMHSA developed a workbook, A Journey Toward Health and Hope, which was created with a lot of input from attempt survivors. So that's another resource. Strengths cards, which is a positive psychology tool that with it's 48 cards that have a strength on one side and then a photo on the other. And the strengths can be something like generous or humorous, organized, you know, and so you can play it on your own, or you can play it with someone where you pick it and then you talk about this strength and when you utilized it. And you can find it online at My Best. Tapping or emotional freedom technique. This is another, it's a powerful holistic technique that has research to prove that research behind it, and it works effectively on a range of issues. There is an app for that as well. And I've used tapping. The best example for that I can give is, I mentioned that I have dissociative identity disorder, so I didn't have full-blown, you know, other personalities, but I would dissociate. So I have lots of, I call them black holes, where I can't remember, don't have memory of things. And I was talking to my oldest brother, and he brought up something by my other brother, the one who died by suicide, something that he had done, and that created a flashback for me. And I had this, you know, violent reaction. I like doubled over. I was shaking. I was nauseous. I was crying. And the problem is that I had to go and leave right away to pick up my mother at the hospital. That was an hour away. And I'm like in no state right now to do that. And I called my therapist, and thank God he was there. And he, you know, we went through a tapping technique over the phone with me, and we did it, and it worked, and I was able to go pick up my mom, and she never realized what had just occurred for that. Another thing that's helpful, not only for the attempt survivor, but really everybody, is self-compassion. And Dr. Kristen Neff has a selfcompassion.org website. And this is, you know, self-kindness versus self-judgment. It focuses on a common humanity rather than just you doing this or just you in this alone. And she also utilizes mindfulness versus over-identification. So, you notice your own suffering, especially when it comes from our own self-judgment and self-criticism. Can you be kind to yourself when you're suffering, or do you go straight into problem-solving mode? Can you comfort and soothe yourself? Be caring and kind in response to the suffering. Be open-hearted toward yourself. And, can you take the perspective of a compassionate other with yourself? And she also has found out that, physical gestures such as stroking or hugging actually release oxytocin, which is the feel-good or the love hormone. Because you care about yourself, you want yourself to be happy. So, you'll want to self-improve. You try not to be harshly critical or judgmental. It's okay to be accepting of yourself and your personal shortcomings. And the good news is that you're always there for you. You know, you'll always be there 24/7 if you need help. She talks about that suffering is part of the human experience. The very definition of being human means that one is mortal, vulnerable, and imperfect. You know, so self-compassion involves recognizing that suffering and personal inadequacy is part of the shared human experience. Something that we all experience, something that we all go through, and rather than happening to me alone, so that we're all interconnected. You know, this is something that we all do, that we all experience. And then she adds mindfulness to it so that we take a balanced approach to our negative emotions so that our feelings are neither suppressed nor exaggerated. This equilibrated stance stems from the process of relating personal experiences to those of others who are also suffering, thus putting our solution, putting our situation into a larger perspective. It also stems from the willingness to observe our negative thoughts and emotions with openness and clarity so that they are held in mindful awareness. And it means that we don't over-identify with the thoughts and feelings. So we don't try and suppress them or deny them. We don't ignore them, but we don't have to dwell on them and get caught up and swept away by negative reactivity. Her website has a lot of great videos too, and I recommend going there and checking that out as well. And I'll have these resources at the end. Excuse me. I also want to talk about resilience, because building resilience is another way to help us and anyone in adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. So, and this is the ability to bounce back, to adapt to difficult situations. Resilience, you know, people, it's been shown that, you know, it's an ordinary trait, and it's not something extraordinary that only certain people have. For one thing, you know, people often commonly demonstrate resilience, and it's also, you know, it's not a trait that you do or don't have. It's something that can be learned and practiced. So you can develop resilience. Dr. Karen Rivik talks about the 7 learnable skills of resilience. And one is emotion regulation. And this is being able to identify your feelings and, when necessary, the ability to control them. Be aware of them and control them. Also, impulse control. Highly resilient people are able to tolerate ambiguity so they don't rush to make decisions. They sit back and look at things and from a different perspective, from different angles, you know, so they know how to deal with it. There are scuba divers who will drown with full tanks of oxygen. They will, because they panicked and they pulled the regulator from their mouths, which was, you know, instinctively did that. If you can regulate your emotion and control your impulse, you know, you would learn, they wouldn't do that if they could have been able to do that. Realistic optimism, and this isn't like the pie in the sky, oh, everything will work out kind of thing. It's the realism that, okay, that didn't go great, but I see what I can do different, and I can see how I can improve that so that next time it'll be better. You know, maybe I wasn't good at, you know, enough this time, but I know I can fix that. So you see it as a setback rather than a failure. Causal analysis just means that you're able to think comprehensively about problems you confront. So you're able to look at it from different angles, consider many factors. Causal analysis seeks to identify and understand the reasons why things are the way they are, and hence enabling focus of change activity. Empathy. People who score high on emotional awareness and understanding their own emotions also score high on empathy. And this is important for resilience because it helps build relationships with others, and then it also gives social support. Self-efficacy, the confidence in your ability to solve problems. This is partly knowing what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and relying on your strengths to cope. And it's not, it's different than self-esteem. It's not just feeling good about yourself. It's like a skills-based mastery based on the notion of coping. And then reaching out, reaching out and being willing to be vulnerable, being willing to ask for help, being willing to become involved with other people. Some tips for improving resilience are: accept change as part of your life. The only constant is change. Look for opportunities of self-discovery. How can, and take the attitude of, what can I learn from this? Rather than, I can't, this is awful and why did it happen to me? Be a quitter. Know when to fold them. If you're miserable in your job, and it's just if you're depressed and miserable or whatever, look for alternatives, find another job. There's no harm in quitting. Get connected. Build strong, positive relationships with loved ones, friends, who can provide you with the needed support and acceptance in both good times and bad. Establish other important connections by volunteering or joining a faith or spiritual community or support group. Make every day meaningful. Do something that gives you a sense of accomplishment and purpose each day. Set goals that help you look forward to each day, to the future with meaning. Learn from experience. Think of how you coped with hardships in the past, and maybe even write about past experience in a journal to help you identify the negative and positive and negative behaviors, but also to help you when you can't think of those times that you handled something in the past, when your memory isn't allowing you to. Remain hopeful. You can't change the past, but you can look forward to the future. You can and accept and even anticipate change, which will help make it easier to adapt and view other new challenges with less anxiety. Take care of yourself. Eat well, sleep well, get enough sleep, exercise, have a healthy diet, practice stress management, relaxation techniques, that kind of thing. I just said that. And be proactive. Don't ignore your problems. Instead, figure out what needs to be done, make a plan, and take action. And although it can take time to recover from a major setback or a traumatic event or a loss, know that your situation can improve if you work at it. I think sometimes one of the secrets to healthy marriages is that you're willing to work at it, so just life, I believe, for me, I've had to work at life, work at things to make my life livable, worth living. There are also these skills to boost your resilience. One is ABC, which is recognize the impact of your in-the-moment thoughts and beliefs on behavior and emotional consequences of adversity. So what's the adversity? What are your beliefs and what are the consequences? What are your thinking traps? What are the errors in thinking that we're often unaware of, such as jumping to conclusion or cognitive distortion? Detecting icebergs, building an awareness of deep-seated beliefs we have of how the world works and how this can impact upon our emotions and behaviors. Maybe those shoulds and oughts come in there. Calming and focusing, finding ways to step back from adversity, create breathing space, and think more resiliently. Challenging our beliefs, a process by which the breadth and thus accuracy of our understanding of events can be enhanced, leading to more effective and sustained problem-solving behaviors. Putting it in perspective, learning to stop that spiraling of catastrophic thinking and turn it into realistic thinking. And then putting in real-time resilience, so putting it all in practice in the moment. This is reliant on mastering the others and offers a fast skill which doesn't rely on having the time to think through a resilient action in depth. So if you think of it, like there are three key skills to analyze your beliefs, to build your awareness of how these beliefs can impact your resilience. So that's the adversity, beliefs and consequences, ABC, avoid thinking traps, and detecting icebergs. Then it's the skill to transfer your attention in the moment to something that can help you get a handle on the situation in a more resilient way. And then what can you do to change your beliefs and begin to challenge the way that your thinking can lead you away from resilience? So these are, then those are the fast skills. I also wanted to include the 7 building blocks of resilience for children, because I honestly and firmly believe if we can teach resilience at an early age, in the long run, we will reduce suicide attempts and behaviors. So one is competence. Encourage children to focus and build on their strength. When they handle a situation capably, acknowledge what they've done and how that will affect them, others and themselves. Let them make safe mistakes so that they have the opportunity to right themselves, and avoid trying to protect them from every stumble. Lectures, are often too complex for young children to understand and too stressful to hear. Instead, break the ideas down one step at a time so that they can truly understand, your points and feel ownership over the lesson they learn. Install confidence. Instead of focusing only on achievements, encourage the development of personal qualities such as fairness, integrity, persistence, and kindness. Praise your children honestly and specifically. So instead of saying, "You're such a good artist," say, "I love the colors you used in that painting. Look at the bright reds and blue birds." It's, specific praise is more believable, and your feedback will have more impact. Encourage them to strive for goals that you think they can achieve, but are a little bit beyond what they've already accomplished, and allow them to have and express emotions. Don't encourage them to suppress unpleasant feelings, and show that relationships matter by addressing conflict directly. So work to resolve problems rather than letting them fester. So encourage children to develop close relationships with others and set an example by fostering your own healthy relationships. And talk to your children about how their behaviors affect other people in good and bad ways. Encourage children to consider right versus wrong when making choices. Help them look beyond the immediate satisfaction or selfish desires. When you make decisions or take actions, express out loud how you think about other people's needs. Work with the children to clarify and express their own values. And always remember, your actions speak louder than your words. Communicate to children and at appropriate age levels, as this is for everything, that many people in the world don't have as much money, freedom, security as they need or as other people do. Teach the important value of serving others. And if you can, model generosity with your time, energy, and resources. Create opportunities for children to contribute in a specific way, like volunteering. Assist children in understanding the difference between a real crisis and something that just feels like one in the moment. Model step-by-step problem solving. Avoid reacting emotionally when you're overwhelmed. Demonstrate the importance of caring for your body through exercise, nutrition, and adequate sleep, and practice relaxation techniques. And encourage children to recognize even their small successes so they know they can succeed. Reward demonstrated responsibility with increased freedom. Remember that the word discipline means to teach, not to punish or control. And finally, I want to just talk a little bit about communication and give some tips, because unfortunately we don't get, most of us don't get courses in how to listen and how to communicate when we're growing up. So and plus so many people and family members, and I know this feeling myself, like you don't want to feel like you're always walking around on eggshells around someone. So a few tips, and I've kind of gone through this, but I just want to hammer in about being empathetic and non-judgmental. Keep in mind that whatever the person is going through, it may be the most important thing in their life at the moment. So try not to judge or discount the feelings of others. Whether or not you think the feelings are justified, the feelings are real for that person. And pay attention to them. And don't be afraid of silence. But, know that it's real for them. It may not seem that way for you, but it is for them. And focus on the feelings. How a person is feeling at the heart of the matter. And here's where your empathy comes into. Watch and listen carefully for the person's real message, but let them understand that you know what's happening, that you understand them. So, that must be scary, and it must be very painful for you to feel this way. Respect personal safe and space. And even though I know these are from a crisis training I've done, and it still, I think, applies to anyone. Stand away from them. Let them have their own space. If you have to get closer, explain or ask permission. But it will reduce a person's anxiety. It helps with their anxiety. Allow time for decision. If a person is upset, they may not be able to think clearly. So give them a few minutes to think through what you've said. Allowing time brings calmness. So be willing to sit quietly, in silence with someone. Stay composed, avoid overreaction. There's a great, Dr. Stephen Porges writes about the polyvagal, P-O-L-Y-B-A-G-A-L theory, and that's like how people will respond subconsciously to each other, so that if someone's upset, our tendencies to feel upset also. So focus on staying composed, on being calm. That will translate over to the other person. If need be, ask with permission to put your hand on them. That will also reduce their anxiety. But it also, this gives you confidence to know that, if the main thing is just don't overreact or react back to them. I've talked a lot about silence, and it's how it's a breeding ground for shame, especially, and guilt. So a lot of times, you know, you feel awkward, you don't know what to do, you don't, you know, a lot of times people just, you know, they feel they don't know what to do, say, or anything, so they don't say anything. And that's really the worst thing you can do. You need, everyone needs to talk about it. And I know someone asked me, you know, what helped you the most? And I would think probably the most important thing that's helped me throughout the years is being able to talk about it freely and without judgment and without being afraid of being hospitalized or anything. I am so lucky, blessed, fortunate, whatever, to have a husband who has learned, and we had, you know, marriage therapy, and where we first started to work on this. And he's learned to just listen to me when I say I'm going down that rabbit hole, you know, that vortex of hell, I call it. And a lot of times just being able to talk about it is all I need to reduce the pain and intensity. And it's like, get it out in the open, get it out in the universe to, you know, the universe can handle it better than my body can. So it's important to talk about it. And, you know, this may be the biggest gift you can give someone. It's just to be able to find someone, a support group, anyone to talk about it. And be open and honest, you know, how do you want to be treated? How should I check on you? You know, how often? How safe do you feel? How depressed are you? What are your triggers? Learn their triggers together, you know. What do you want us to do? What helps you? You know, another way is to develop a sense of like a shorthand, like a numeric scale, where you can devise a plan together so that you don't need to ask a lot of questions. But like I can go to my husband say I'm at a 7, so that means he knows, okay, I have to listen to this. You know, a 5, okay, well, would exercising, would taking a walk help? What do you know, kind of thing. But if it's at a 7 or 8, okay, let's talk about this, you know, so that we can prevent it from getting to a 9 or 10. It helps everyone to know, keep it in perspective and know, is that, you know, how serious is this? What, how, you know, is this, like, is this imminent or not? I just want to underline that I know this isn't easy. I am not saying it is. I know it's a difficult subject. It's hard. It can feel like a burden. It can feel overwhelming. But honestly, you can do it. And a lot of times it's the simplest act of kindness can be something that can save a person's life. And I'm not kidding about that. I used to have these rubber bracelets from Feeling Blue, and you know, they were like $1, and I was wearing it, and I was at Costco, and the checkout guy remarked about it, and he liked it, and he said, "Oh, I really like that." That's, yeah, and I gave it to him. You would have thought I gave him a Rolex watch. I mean, he was just beaming and so happy, and that a complete stranger gave him this. Now, it wasn't anything, but you know, maybe that's what he needed at the moment. I work in part-time, I have a part-time job in retail. We were handing out magnets that said "Choose Love." Well, it was a promotion. You were supposed to say something about it, but for some reason I gave the woman the promotion, and she looked at me and had tears in her eyes and said, "You have no idea what this means to me today, how much I needed to hear this, or what this means to me today. Thank you." You know, so sometimes we put undue pressure on ourselves. We think it has to be this big gesture or something. It doesn't. You know, just being a kind, caring, compassionate person is all that's needed. And, you know how to do that. also don't want to forget, you know, self-care, the necessity of self-care. I love this quote: how we care for ourselves gives our brain messages that shape our self-worth so that we may care for ourselves in every way, every day. I do this crisis training with certified peer specialists with the Pennsylvania Peer Support Coalition. I did that, and Dave Measle, the director, would do the self-care part, and he would always talk about, he would always have us stand up and stretch, and okay, now can you stretch just a little more? And okay, a little more, and everybody always could. And he said, okay, when it comes to self-care, don't do that. Keep that reserved for yourself. Always keep a little bit of reserve for yourself. And that's what I want you to do too. Don't forget self-care. And I mentioned resources. Here are the resources: Energy Psych, Prevent Suicide PA, Lifeline has several websites. Live Through This, if you need help with empathy, this is a great site to go through and read their stories of people who've survived a suicide attempt. There's a self-compassion. Speaking of suicide, Dr. Stacy Friedenthal. A book that I feel was instrumental in saving my life is Choosing to Live by Dr. Tom Ellis and Corey Newman. That was just, I still read it from time to time today. It was just life-changing. If you want to know more about shame, I have a webinar on my website speaking about shame builds resilience and recovery. There's also a new book out, excuse me, called Alternatives to Suicide: Beyond Risk and Toward a Life Worth Living. Kevin Hines' story, and DeQuincy Lezine has a great story of his attempt when he was younger. So here is my contact information if you need me, or Govan from Prevent Suicide PA. Sorry, this wasn't the actual live webinar, but at least you got the material. So thank you very much. I appreciate being here. Bye-bye.